For those of you who don't know me, I'm Bilal Orfali, and I'm the chair of the Department of Arabic and Near Eastern Languages at the American University of Beirut. This event and the conference is on anthologies, approaches to the pre-modern Arabic anthologies, is sponsored by the Center for Arts and Humanities and the Department of Arabic and Near Eastern Languages. I once again thank you, all the participants. I thank the center. I thank the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. I wholeheartedly thank Rita and Rania one more time. I thank Kevork actually, and I hope we haven't bored you, Kevork, in these 3 days. We'll give him a certificate if he wants to teach Arabic. He actually helps us in all our events. So thank you again, Kevork. It's a true pleasure to welcome in Beirut a scholar who is not at all a stranger to Beirut and to AUB. My own doctor mother, back then she was a professor at Yale University. Now she's a professor of Arabic at the Free University of Berlin. Her areas of research include the development, Dr. Beatrice Gruendler, of course. Her areas of research include the development of Arabic script, classical Arabic poetry and its social context, the integration of modern literary theory into the study of Near Eastern literatures, Arabic book history, and the role of Arabic in global literature. She has books in each of these areas. I'll name a few of them. She is the author of The Development of the Arabic Scripts from the Nabatean Era to the First Islamic Century, 1993. So this book has been translated to Arabic in 2004. It was actually her first graduate paper at Harvard University. And she always made sure that we know this before we submit our papers. And I'm saying this because some of my students are in the room. So your papers can become actually books from Harvard University Press.
But I handed it in late.
They should not need to hear this. She was saying she handed it late. So her second book is Medieval Arabic Praise Poetry, Ibn Rumi and the Patron's Redemption, 2003, and The Life and Times of Abu Tammam, Akhbar Abi Tammam, by Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Yahya As-Suli, 2015. She is also a contributing editor of Understanding Near Eastern Literatures, A Spectrum of Interdisciplinary Approaches, 2000, Writers and Rulers, Perspectives from Abbasid to Safavid Times, 2004, and Classical Arabic Humanities in Their Own Terms, 2007. And this is the Festschrift of Wolfhard Heinrichs, Allah yarhamu. Professor Gruendler is completing several books right now, one on book history, but the book that she's working on now, it's actually, I think, going to be a number of books, is on Kalīla wa-Dimna, and a critical edition of Kalīla wa-Dimna. I cannot even explain to you here the importance of such a project, but I'll leave this to her to tell us about the problems involved. Professor Gruendler received many honors during her career, most recently the Leibniz Prize. Please join me in welcoming this distinguished lecturer, our honorary guest speaker, Professor Beatrice Gruendler. Her title is Indian Wisdom in Kalīla wa-Dimna. Please.
Thank you very much, Bilal, for this beautiful introduction. Thank you all for being here, and I also join Bilal in thanking the organizers, Sarita and Rania, who've done an amazing job. Bilal's co-organizer, Abdulrahim Abu-Husayn, and also the great choice of this venue, which is very festive. Also, it's always nice to be together with colleagues in Arabic studies, which is a bit like a big family. And as any family, those of you I have only gotten to know here who are young and at the beginning of their career, always very welcome, because a family needs constantly new young people to join it. Now, what is the meaning of anthology? In book publishing, an anthology is a collection of literary works chosen by the compiler. It may be a collection of pieces from one or several genres and excerpts by one or different authors. Being a selection, it differs from the complete collections of a person's work, such as a diwan. Arabic literature is full of anthologies, which by itself may be a question to investigate and rightfully a topic of a conference like the present one. In fact, the variety and styles of anthologies in Arabic literature, as we've heard in these last days, are sheer innumerable. As is the type of writing that does without an author's adding a single word by himself, including a specific term created for this type of compiling, tasrif. There are several obvious reasons why anthologies were necessary. One of them, the geographical expanse and the long life of Arabic as a literary language, which led to an unwieldy mass of text, omnipresent in the form of the manuscript codices since the 9th century. With the progression of centuries, particularly from the Mamluk period onwards, anthology writing was often the bread and butter of literati, for themselves, for specific patrons, and the community of scholars. The wealth and variety of literary production needed to be broken down, sorted, and digested to manageable amounts for those who wished to acquaint themselves without wanting or being able to become specialists. This shows immediately that the didactic or pragmatic purpose of anthologies. They were texts put together for quick overview based on a well-chosen spectrum of works, be these from a period, a person, a genre, or motif, and for immediate application in one's conversation or one's own writing. This brings me to the issue you have certainly been wondering about, to wit, what Kalīla wa-Dimna has to do with anthologies. As a work sui generis, a manual of statecraft, and a classic of adab, at first glance, it does not appear to be an anthology. It is true, however, that it is composed of several pieces, namely parables from the Mahabharata and the Panchatantra, Middle Persian narratives, and Arabic tales. As such, it could be seen as a diachronically grown, successfully compiled anthology of edifying and instructive tales. In turn, the smaller forms that pepper the longer narratives, the wisdom sayings, the hikam, and the analogical images, also called amthal, often no longer than one sentence, have in turn become the material of anthologies, and we find them cherry-picked in handbooks of adab such as Ibn Qutayba's Choice Reports, Uyun al-Akhbar, Ibn Abd al-Rabbih's Unique Necklace, the al-Farid, and Miskawayh's Eternal Wisdom, Jawidan Khirad. The first aspect, the former, was an accrual that happened over many centuries in 3 geographical regions and is not the work of one compiler. And the anthological purpose of the collection, though plausible, still remains to be proven, and with the lack of evidence, especially from the Pahlavi phase, is likely never to be retrieved. The second is something that occurred after the work was compiled, the cherry-picking, in whatever form, because this longs remains elusive and cannot be ascribed to any of the authors or compilers of Kalīla and Dimna itself. There is, however, a third and more central way in which Kalīla and Dimna functions like an anthology. And here, though we do often not have distinct names of those who were involved, we can define them as a group, namely the copyist redactors who wrote this collection between the 13th and 19th centuries, and they did so thoroughly that almost no 2 words remained next to each other. How can I argue this? As most of you will inveigh that Ibn Muqaffa was the one who translated and reshaped it to become the model for elevated fiction and a classic of adab. To begin with, The book, whose story certainly is well recorded, disappeared as a text immediately after its Arabic version came into being. For half a millennium, snippets appear here and there, which constitute a sizable indirect tradition, but there's no trace of the book as a whole. Only in the 13th century, the full manuscripts resurface. By then, much has changed, which we will see. For instance, when we compare the surviving manuscripts with each other, they differ so drastically in length and content that no reduction to a common origin is possible. Several factors have coincided to change the original purpose, message, and audience and make it serve in some ways like an anthology. For one, the language has become substandard with a fair share of Middle Arabic features. Second, the addressees are no longer kings and courtiers, but a wider audience below the elite, those who would manage to read and write Arabic, even though imperfectly. Third, the genre has shifted from a mirror of princes to a collection of popular ethics and every man's philosophy. And fourth, the function was retooled to serve as a guide for general human behavior and interaction. But before going into detail, let me, for those of you who are not familiar, give you a brief overview of the work's adventurous history. Kalīla wa-Dimna is at the same time one of the most popular pre-modern books and a pioneering work of Arabic literature in several ways. First, it has two layers of meaning, one overt and one hidden, which has to be decoded by the reader. Second, it displays a sophisticated framing structure with replaceable modular elements, which makes it easily adaptable to new cultural contexts. Third, it is one of the first Arabic books and reflects on how books are to be read and their content applied in real life. And finally, it is one of the most frequently illustrated books of Arabic literature and speaks about the function of illustration in one of its prefaces. Above all, it is a cosmopolitan work. From Sanskrit, it traveled to Europe and Asia via an intermediate Arabic phase, and it became the most widely spread European medieval text. The archaeologist James Henry Breasted, founder of the Chicago Oriental Institute, once described it as, I quote, an ancient text which, next to the Bible, has become the most widely distributed and translated book in the entire history of literature. And he made it one of the pilot projects of his institute, created in 1919 with the support of John D. Rockefeller, as a, I quote, laboratory for the study of the rise and development of civilization. People took the mouth very full in those days. But this remained a prelude to an unfinished edition. The Arabic version of Kalīla wa-Dimna is the direct or indirect source of all later translations, the point of departure of its global dissemination, and the place where all research on its subsequent textual history must engage. However, the quest to entangle the tortuous textual history of this version is as complex as the book itself. The extant witnesses of the Arabic version, more correctly versions, vary to such a degree that any expectation of reconstructing an original is unrealistic, and indeed no critical edition has been accomplished to this day. Inversely, the work's textual history offers a prime example of a mutable and fluctuating written transmission, which is unusual for a book that once belonged to the adab corpus of classical Arabic literature and counted as a model of eloquent prose. As centuries went by, the book's classical Arabic register became more and more hybrid in some manuscripts, although the precise degree varies in each, and its content transformed in multiple ways, which, to sketch out, is the present purpose. Moreover, Ibn Muqaffa, who died after all in 757, the Arabic translator-redactor of Kalīla wa-Dimna, has all but disappeared behind iterations of rewriting. We can no longer tell what he himself may or may not have composed in the mid-8th century because his words have been layered over by countless later copyist redactors, many of whom did not sign their names. This was once the most widespread text in the medieval West. It is a classic, but it is anonymous, even though we glimpse here and there the name of some Fulin ibn Fulin, who declared his name, not his interference, in a colophon, such as Hassan al-Rabat, the owner of a lending library of popular literature in late 18th, 19th century Aleppo. To attempt a conventional critical edition of Kalīla wa-Dimna is not only impossible, it would be a distortion of its eventful textual history. This work is therefore the site of manifold polarities between Ibn Muqaffa and his competing anonymous co-editors, between classical Arabic and Middle Arabic, and between rationality and triviality. Regarding its authorship, there were no true authors to begin with. The book began as a translation from Middle Persian, where it was a selection, redaction, and translation of anonymous mutable Indian works, Panchatantra and Mahabharata, whose textual history is another headache. This made it even easier to pull Ibn Muqaffa off his pedestal, and in fact, most Arabic sources refer to Kalīla wa-Dimna as Kitab al-Hind, eclipsing Ibn Muqaffa altogether. One famous French descendant, which served as a model for the fables of Jean de La Fontaine, is attributed to Le Sage Pilpay, the wise Pilpay. And this is none other than Bey Daba, the philosopher who tells the King Dabshalim instructive fables in the frame tale, and who is turned into the author of the entire books, which amounts to the same as making Shahrazad the author of the Arabian Nights. Here I will just give you a quick geographical spread. You see Sanskrit as the thickness of the error shows the chronological progression. So from Sanskrit it goes into Pahlavi, which is lost, and from there to Syriac and Arabic. The Syriac is no further translated, it's a dead end. And then from Arabic you see the numerous arrows that branch out in all directions. A lot of them going to Europe, of course, from right to left, Greek, Hebrew, Spanish, and the Hebrew into Latin then becomes another place from which other European versions appear, and we have all sorts of languages, Icelandic, Czech, Hungarian, so really there's hardly a European language this was not translated into. But do not forget that there's also an arrow to Southeast Asian languages, Malay and so on, which all happens, well, late 18th and 19th century. That is still a puzzle that I have to solve. If you put it nicely into a chronological chart, you can see from left to right, so each column would be a century. That in the middle, and the colors group geographical areas together. So all blue is Europe, and then green is the Middle East. Yellow are Turkic languages, orange are Indian languages, and on the very bottom these are South Asian languages. So after a sort of an Arabic origin, I left out the Sanskrit, that would have made it too small. So we start with Arabic, and then in the 11th century you have sort of a cluster of early medieval translation, a Latin bridge version, and then on the bottom you see this extreme flourishing of European translations. German is the one is most often translated into, that is the broadest. It starts in 1482, and then as you go right in the 19th century there is, how many is it, 7? I can't even see. The French ones are also quite frequent. There are not as many, but the French version then passed it off to many, many other languages. So it was also another distributing version. As you go down, we have the Turkic, so both Persian, the Anbar-e Suhaili and the Humayun Name were drastically rewritten versions that became classics in their own right. And in the 19th century, 18th and 19th, you see the return to South Asia. So in a way, as well as Indian languages, it's a spiral back to the geographical region, although the way it looks, and I have not looked at any of those versions yet, I have 10 years to do this, may look drastically different. So sometimes I feel like this. This is a photograph of Jeff Wall. This talk can offer only preliminary diagnosis of the textual problems and a proposal for their solution, because research on Kalīla wa-Dimna accustoms one that at each turn unexpected puzzles lay hidden. For instance, the relations among the manuscripts vary from chapter to chapter, even within one same chapter, as does the degree of proximity or distance among the manuscripts. Therefore, until the totality of extant specimens has been surveyed and compared, one must refrain from generalizing initial and partial findings. There are several ways to access the text of Kalīla wa-Dimna one may choose from, namely, in chronological order, the indirect transmission, beginning with the 9th century, the medieval translations, since the 11th century, and full Arabic manuscripts since the 13th century. Each of these paths is paved with surprises, and paradoxically, although this work appears to be well known, the closer one looks, the less familiar it becomes. Here I will follow the third path, to wit, complete Arabic manuscripts. Such work relies also on the foundational studies of Kalīla wa-Dimna by Silvestre de Sacy, the French grandfather of Arabic studies, who produced the first European printed edition, Karl Brockelmann, Theodor Nöldeke, and then a lot of Sanskritists who, by the way, also knew Aramaic, Hebrew, Latin, and so on. We can only be jealous. Franklin Edgerton, Theodor Benfey, Harry Falk, and others. And thereafter, a pioneering step was undertaken by Martin Sprengling in 1924 with this attempt of a conventional critical edition and reconstruction of the original, which already then Theodor Nöldeke called a colossal task. But this project was not carried to term, and the state of scholarship has hardly moved forward since then. Robert Irwin described the problem in 1992 still in the same manner. I quoted, "Its," meaning Kalīla wa-Dimna's text, "was not treated with respect by copyists and adapters. It has so far proved impossible to reconstruct the exact text written by Ibn Muqaffa." And although Sprengling fell short from his main goal, he identified the sequence of the chapters as a parameter of classification. That's here A to F letters. A further sequence has since been discovered, which I labeled G. And François de Blois, in his short but very important book, edited the short version of Bourset's Voyage, one of the prefaces from a number of manuscripts, and presents a useful survey of dated and undated manuscripts preserved in European libraries. At this stage of research on the manuscript edition consisting of many different versions, only a synoptic critical edition can do the work justice, juxtaposing and comparing versions and investigating these in their received form without any attempt of reconstruction. The goal is not to turn back the wheel of time, but rather to document the history of the text in its preserved state and to analyze the content and factors of the textual development. On this basis, an array of questions arise. How can a work change so much and remain simultaneously the same? How exactly did it change? Who changed it? And why? Big questions. Before broaching these larger questions, the textual witnesses must be surveyed and two immediate questions be resolved. First, how do the manuscripts relate to each other? And second, what is unique and specific about each manuscript? These initial questions have been explored here and based on a small sample in order to refine them and discover every possible aspect of comparison in this fluctuating tradition. Only then the larger questions of the reasons for the variation, its connection with the work's linguistic register, that shift from classical to Middle Arabic, and the agency behind it can be addressed. In the following, one should bear in mind that the variation of Kalīla wa-Dimna is a result of written, not oral, transmission, and that one cannot automatically privilege some manuscripts over others based on their early dating, since even the earliest ones are separated by 5 centuries from the Arabic translator-editor, and late manuscripts may be based on lost versions from several centuries prior. In comparing a selection of manuscripts below, their relative chronology was therefore not considered an a priori factor, since their dating need not necessarily coincide with that of the version they contain. The 7 manuscripts investigated here represent a sample from circa 100 extant specimens so far identified, but not all yet read through. They were selected based on different parameters. I still look at those from an early date in absence of better knowledge, but also their distribution among the different chapter sequences, try to cover those, and their substantial amount of rewriting, since the goal was to arrive at a maximum of variation to detect as many types of change as possible. So this is the ones I looked at. The first 5 are from the 13th to the 15th century. So they're relatively early, but again, saying early, it still means they are half a millennium after the original Arabic version. And for all purposes, whatever Ibn Muqaffa's pen produced must be considered loss, and the proliferating text tradition overwriting him up to the 19th century be studied in its own right. The intervening dark period from the mid-8th to the early 13th century may be filled in partly by the fragmentary indirect transmission and the medieval translations. Although both require their own specific approaches, one major source of the indirect transmission from the 10th century has been adduced here as an early point of orientation. The last 2 manuscripts are from the 7th century, again because they exhibited substantial rewriting, which at this point I wanted to introduce into my study. The rewriting thereafter did not stop, but it continued with verve during the 18th and 19th centuries, and the yet increased degree of narrative and linguistic variation extending into the dialectal register in the inspected manuscripts, so far I have looked at, especially the one by Ahmad ibn Rabat, the lending library owner that I just mentioned, requires, however, a separate investigation because the more invasive reduction process needs to be placed within the context of changing social cultural parameters, such as the increased readership and the rise of authorship in segments of the population below the educated elite. Now, to return to the aspect of anthology, let us remind ourselves what makes an anthology. It is accessible. How many points do I have? 6. Number 1, it is accessible, easy to consult, and the selections are representative and not too difficult. Second, an anthology tends to be user-friendly. The contents are sorted and easy to locate in the book. Third, it has a value as an object, carries prestige, and it's a sign of the owner's or redactor's education. Sometimes it might be the only book in the household. Fourth is that it is addressed at a wide audience. Fifth, it provides a wide spectrum over a body of texts. And last, it imparts a sort of education that benefits its reader intellectually, socially, and ethically. The last point is particularly important in our case. But let me explain in detail how this happens in Kalīla wa-Dimna. Accessible. Its genre, the animal fable, is entertaining. The style is pleasant, and at least in the beginning it was very easy prose, and the style in general is not very difficult. The framing structure adds variation, and it's enlivened by sayings and analogies that add color. User-friendliness. The addition of tables of contents makes things easy to find. Here, a set of manuscripts add in their incipits, in their pieces added in front of the already 3 or 4 prefaces, a further introduction, and a particular version of that is composed of first a short list of chapters and then a longer list of chapters containing short synopses of each chapter. The latter highlight key concepts of each chapter, its message, and for whom it is relevant, and I will return to that later. The object value. That was point number 3. The book is, in its own pages, often described as a treasure. It's cherished by those who own it, and a work that eternalizes those who made it available to its readers, particularly 2 probably legendary figures, namely the Persian physician who went to India and brought the book in secret, and the Persian vizier who then was commissioned to write a chapter about the life of, your Burzo and Beirut. Some people say they are the same. There's a long discussion about that. There are also staged performances of public reading of this book, twice, of the book as a whole and then of the new chapters, with the entire audience of the kingdom present, and this is done to much acclaim. So it's a celebration of the book. Point 4, wide audience. The recipient is often called in a general way the intelligent, al-aqil, or the human being, al-insan. Or in the public readings that are described, it is ra'iyya, the subject, ahl al-mamlaka, or the common people, suqa. So suqa is also part of the audience. Spectrum. It encompasses a comprehensive and even contradictory set of pragmatics and ethics for the everyday reader. And then last, education and social benefit. On many occasions, its contents are celebrated as, I enumerate, wisdom, philosophy, knowledge, education, general smartness, sort of practical intelligence, and its social benefits are vaunted. We have an epistemic totality that this book is supposed to cover. And once these terms represented each different epistemic pursuits, mutually exclusive, such as ilm and adab. Ilm is going deep on one thing, adab is knowing a little bit of everything, so that you do either that or that. These were not the same people. In Kalīla wa-Dimna, they are amalgamated to a totalizing, if watered down, whole. The reader gets every aspect of knowledge in one step. Let us now look into what these modes of instructions add to the text. In what way they help us to deal with the book. This is now the table of contents, and I'll show you 3 different ones. This is the earliest one. This is manuscript Pocock 400 from the 14th century, very beautifully written. And this is the part, unfortunately, in this version, the short table of contents and the little prose after is missing, and it sort of breaks off and starts with the long table of contents, but you see very nicely that each chapter is given a small synopsis. A later version, this is the 17th century version, Paris Bibliothèque Nationale 5881 from the 17th century. Here you get, this is the beginning, this is the short table of contents, so this is in running text with, in nice read, the chapter titles, and then the passage that describes the book. So immediately you see what you find, and you can also see a lot of red dotting going on. Frequently in manuscripts of Kalīla wa-Dimna you get extensive formatting markers. Whenever there is, the king said, it's overlined, or when there are 8 qualities to the intelligent man, they are overlined. So copyists or illuminators are careful to make the different types of information readily accessible. And in case of this one, there exists, or of the Pocock, rather, of the Pocock one, and this is Manchester 486, the same version of an added incipit to the text, also the section with the synopses. This was a little bit cheaper, so the formatting wasn't quite as nice, but still you can see as a reader, where to go right away if you want to know a particular thing. Now, who is addressed? What I did is I went through the table of contents with a synopsis and excerpted, put apart the pieces, and looked who is actually addressed in those. And the interesting part is kings are highlighted in red. The audience is, and the numbers 1 to 16 is the number of chapters, and the first one is the chapter, is the preface of I almost said Imru Qais. I meant Ibn Muqaffa, and the second one is the life of Bourzoy. Just so, not in each TOC, depending on whether Ibn Muqaffa and the Bourzoy's life is counted as a chapter or not, you have different numbers. And the rest are the translated chapters. Well, the long story on each of them. I don't want to go into detail right now. But as per those table of contents added by the later copyists, beyond the reader being addressed, man qara hadha al-kitab, so everybody. Kings are only mentioned in 4 places as the addressees. And so in a small part of the entire chapters, everywhere else, it's different type of addressees. It's either the intelligent, al-aql, or it's zawul al-bab, the mindful, zul ma'rifa, the smart. My sense, I am not sure that ma'rifa at this point is some kind of practical intelligence. You can tell me. Then the educated, al-adib, that we have in number 6. And in one case, the victim of mistreatment, that is in chapter 12. So the public is wide open. No longer is this book really a manual of statecraft, nor addressed at courtiers either. Courtiers were also addressed from the very beginning. Now, what does it contain? This is excerpted from the little prose passage that connects the short and the long table of contents. As you can see, first we get I have not counted whether it's true, 330 babs of wisdom, which cover kings and the well-being of their subjects, rulers and statecraft. In a variant is council rather than statecraft. Well, this doesn't seem surprising, but then trust in friends and the handling of friends, the mudarat, keeping the company of people with integrity, evil people keeping away from them, good people keeping close to them, gaining one's livelihood and accumulating wealth, reason and effective answers. In a variant, it's good deeds. So it's al-jawabat and al-khairat, one of those things. The first one's probably the original. Foolishness, hatred and slander, and asceticism, which is the opposite of managing wealth. So you see a nice example of mutually exclusive virtues are sort of serialized here, and all of that, and then we get a nice description. This is actually very nice literary description of what happens in that book. Although, again, the exact meaning of Dusa is also not quite clear to me. So overall, what we have here is a general type of street smartness, practical intelligence that is a common denominator besides ethics. This is just a short summary. Then the gists go a little bit more into details, and you can sort of read with me. I try to make it as short as I could. But systematizing the information, because some chapters say the same as others, or play on the theme. It's all sort of things what is useful for a regular person. There's much on friendship, on being loyal, that's chapters 3 and 5, but also on in whom to place one's trust, that's chapter 11, King and Bird, and in whom not. It's also the same chapter. There's much about foes, about enemies, escaping their ruse, chapter 9, and their harm, chapter 3, and also, on occasion, working with one's enemies for a limited time, that's chapter 10, the rat and the cat. Then how to use ruse oneself, it's chapter 6, and how one should not do unto others as one does not wish to be treated oneself, that is chapter 15. Advice must be sought, that's chapter 9. And then there are some further precepts of also again of practical intelligence to avoid hastiness, that's chapter 8. To do good to those who deserve it and who pay it back, that's chapter 13, the traveler and the goldsmith. And to keep to one's own professional expertise, that is the ascetic and the guest, number 16. No action is explained in chapter 14, The King and His Sons, which is about fate. That could be either that was just useless. You couldn't apply that to any action. Or it could just be the case that there are sometimes situations where there's nothing you can do. You just have to accept. But the silence is talking. Also, each synopsis has always a message. This is knowledge that's supposed to be applied. This is not theoretical knowledge, this is practical. So each chapter has a particular call to action. Of course, in the preface, that's the mode of instruction, how to read the book. one should study the book carefully. It's talba, not just, you know, leaf it through and look at pictures. You're not supposed to do that. One should reflect on it, tazakkur, and take it as a guide, dalil, chapter 10. And it's also an education, a ta'deeb, chapter 9. More often, though, there are distinct do's and don'ts. It's either a da'iyah, a summon to do something, this is in 6:12 and 16, an incentive, a muraghib, to do something, or it's a warning, a zaj'an, not to do something. That's actually the most frequent, happened in 4 chapters, 3, 7, 8, and 15. Namely, not to believe slander, not to be careless, not to be hasty, and not to harm other people. So we have before us the survival guide for the intelligent person. And this just after reading the book's first 3 pages. And that's why, you know, that is the piece that has been added, you know, at the latest at the 14th century and copied in a number of manuscripts. So far, I have 4 versions of this incipit. Now, this is a particular, and this is in total a piece of text that's been added. But and sometimes we have an extant piece of text that is rewritten, and where you have to sleuth out the new pieces with a little bit more difficulty in those expand and changed facets appear in parts of the plot. So, instance, in the Long Voyage of Bouzoy, the elaborated pieces concern the public display and reading of Kalīla wa-Dimna as it has been brought to India, and then the commissioning of another chapter by the Vizier Buzurg-Mir on the physician who brought it, which again is read out publicly. Those passages receive a lot of elaboration. In the same chapter, the Long Voyage is a very interesting chapter because it deals with what one does with books and content, and it gets, that is so far the chapter that is rewritten most drastically. I thought it would be the preface, but when I read that over last Christmas, I sort of, my eyes went over. The audience of those public readings that are depicted in there is detailed in some places. So sometimes we get a nice list, viziers, grades, generals, the elite, and dignitaries. But most manuscripts mention all people, sa'ir al-nas, or ahl al-mamlaka. And then some mention an intermediate class of society, namely notaries, ru'us al-ashhad. And then finally, the benefits of the book are vaunted in numerous places. By now we know we have hikmah and ilm in there. That's probably been there from the beginning. Certainly hikmah, perhaps not ilm. But this is further expanded to include ma'rifah, adab, aql. And the Persian commissioned to compose the new chapter, Buzurg-Mir, should employ in doing so all of ra'i, taqa, qalb, himma, and adab. So again, you get the maximizing of different types of knowing, of an epistemic totality. The book itself is described in the same comprehensive way as a conglomerate of things. You would love that idafa, nazmu ta'lifi kalamin mutqanin muhkamin. If they could have added some more, it is just the supreme book. Its eloquence is particularly stressed. It is but the aspect most stressed is organization. So many times it's repeated, it's a ta'lif, it has nidam, it has abwab, and it has a very good tartib. And its purpose, of course, is ta'dib and ibra. It is ma'ruf and mashhur. And specifically, it is coded. It has amsal, in another case, maqayis, and it is only to be decoded by intelligent readers. So whoever reads this book constantly congratulates himself or herself on one's own smartness, because not smart people cannot understand this book. They might not know Arabic. Let me go further into one other little mess, which is the chapter of the queen and the vizier, which is digs deep on a particular aspect of it, which is the who is allowed to give a king advice. And this is where, again, the tension comes in on political power, but also on personal question. That chapter was described in the introduction as one that contains beautiful sayings and teachings of the hereafter, ta'addub baligh fi dunya wa din. And it is also cited in Miskawayh's Jawidan Khirat. It's a remarkable chapter for a number of reasons. It comes from the Mahabharata. It has only human characters, and it is the one chapter in the book that doesn't have a fixed place, because in each of the table of contents it jumps around. We don't know why. This is what happens. The king asks the philosopher about the king's primary virtue to preserve his rule, because like each chapter, there's always the initial question. The king asks, explain to me that. So what is the virtue that the king needs to preserve his realm? And the philosopher says, helm, this untranslatable word. But thereafter, the king proves exactly he does not have helm, because nothing does he do earlier than condemning his own wife to death, after she has just saved him from killing everybody else. He had dreams, and the Brahmin said, you have to kill everybody you love. And then she said, no, no, no. Well, she was smarter than that. She, sent him to some wise ascetic who said, no, no, this is all good. You will receive presents from delegations, which is true. He survives, everybody survives, he thanks her, but then soon thereafter, because he calls her stupid, on the occasion of the distribution of the presents, and that happens because she exchanges glances with the vizier. The king oversees that, catches the glances, and in order to pretend this did not happen, she picks the lesser present, which is the diadem. And then he calls her stupid, and she pulls a rice bowl over his head. So that's the story. But in the end, she survives. Here we have a picture of, and this is the Assessee Manuscript. Now, to make the long things short, I will abbreviate this a little bit, just to show you a little bit of the handiwork. In order to analyze the variation, I cut the text into pieces, and in doing so, respecting the different elements of the narrative. So you have always frame dialogue elements, then you have third-person narrative, you have monologue or dialogue of the characters. Within this, analogical images, amsal, and wisdom sayings, hikam, and then paratexts such as abstracts get added in the beginning, summaries or commentaries at the end. Then you go through the manuscript, segment them, and see what shows up. And you have holes, it looks like a Swiss cheese, because obviously at some places, some manuscripts add things. And you can see that here, right after the primary quality, philosopher mentions primary quality. There, not all, but some manuscripts add another one. So this primary quality obviously was a point where some copyists felt interfering. Guess what? The addition is in some manuscript, after the helm, the most important thing is the support of a virtuous wife or a smart vizier. And that changes. Then I gave you the first half, so it doesn't get too small. Again, there are some sort of Verwerfungen, some gaps. So whenever you look where entire segments are added or cut. We can't always tell because it's also a bridge through time. So one fluctuation plays around the unit 25 is one must consult the right people. So again, who are the right people? Obviously, the king consulted the Brahmins, who nearly were, his end, and he did not know where to get good advice from. That is good for himself. Or the situation when you go to number 38, the queen chooses crown. This is the situation where the choice and the mutual understanding with the vizier comes out. Again, this is more drama. Another thing you can also see, no such thing as manuscript groups. There is a fluctuation, and this is only one way to see that, since I have thrown out the idea of the stemma, this is a quantitative view. This is based on another chapter. For this chapter, I haven't done this yet. The length of the manuscript is the horizontal axis, so on the right you have the longest, on the left the shortest manuscripts. And the vertical axis shows the number of units that also appear in another manuscript. So on the lower one, the little blue one in the corner, is very idiosyncratic, whereas the ones that are high, the green and the brown, are manuscripts that sort of include everything that happened somewhere else. So that's one way. It's a very hard thing to visualize that. And in a way, you can tell there is no grouping, answer to the initial questions, the movement is fluid, and there is a certain number of uniqueness by unique text segments. And then when you go inside, this is the system that we use that has been conceived by Halle University. The barcode shows you the segments, and underneath is, where that orange bar is, this is where we're looking, and then we can synoptically see what goes on in a particular manuscript. And the manuscripts here excerpted you have on the left side. It's the American book back order, so it's like you turn it around like that. So that the top manuscript is the one on the left. The colors on the bottom, please ignore that algorithm doesn't know Arabic yet. Here we've taught our algorithm a little bit of Arabic, still incomplete. What is colored so far, what I want the algorithm to do, is to show what is unique to one particular manuscript. Then I can see right away, okay, here's heavy rewriting, here is less rewriting. Doesn't quite function as one does as a good philologist. One uses one's pencil. And after 2 hours of that, you get headache. I made a synoptic, a thumbnail sketch of the relationships between the manuscript in the middle on the right, and you can see two kinds of things that happen in this particular chapter. Again, this is the kind of variation you have in this chapter. Another chapter will be another kind of variation. On the one hand, there's this fluctuation on the right side with blue, green, yellow. So anything in yellow is more for the block on the right, plus B. I'll call the columns by A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Then on the right, whatever is sort of sky blue belongs together. The green is going a bit into another manuscript, but the pale blue is the one that really is the fourth on the right, and I call that a continuum, a redactional continuum, because the texts are very close, but they're not identical. Pink is where the copyist discarded whatever was there and wrote his own thing. So this is unique. So the two pink are different. And in this case, now if you look at the content, I'll give you the story short. The blue part is where the queen is described, and the merits of the queen are described as an intelligent woman, as a perfect woman, as a beautiful woman. Though beautiful often is only one manuscript mentions she's beautiful. That's not important. She's just, she's empathic, and so on and so forth. She saved the king's life, and so on. The pink passages in those two manuscripts, Riyadh and Paris 3473, are where the vizier is vaunted as the vizier is the one who saved the king, and the vizier is the professional, and he not only advises the king well, he also refrains from the king exerting his own whims. So you can see distinctly that the manuscripts or the redactions pull the thrust of royal advising into different directions. And the one is more a group, or in this case a continuum, the other ones are unique pieces. What we cannot say is whether the one or the other direction was sooner or was earlier, because from both cases we have early manuscripts, 13th, 14th century, and late ones, 17th century. So far we cannot tell. We skip all of this. I'll just give you some more visuals of later units. So that's how the rewriting goes, so you can read a little bit with me. Some manuscripts about the primary quality mention Hilm, so that's the shortest one. But as we go down, we get more detail. So you have the Mushawara, then some mention al-Wazir al-Labib, or only al-Labib, but on the bottom, 3466, we have Ahla al-Ilm wa Rifq wal-Amn wal-Hub lil-Bir. This is, in this manuscript, we have the well-meaning people, the good people, who need not the technically smart people, but the people who wish well, the friends and the family. And just to give you some more visuals, same thing. So the Riyadh manuscript from the 14th century tends to have a lot of idiosyncratic rewriting. In the others it changes, but as you go through the entire chapter, you see that the four on the right side tend to hang in some way together. And they also cover a wide spectrum, because the Hagia Sophia, remember you brought that for me, is the oldest we have from the 13th century, whereas the one on the leftmost, the Paris 5887, 881, is from the 17th century. So we have 400 years between these manuscripts. That's another one. Again, one must consult the right people, not ask the wrong one. You have al-Ahibba in one case, and al-Akhilla, the friends. But in the manuscript on the top, by rereading of the Rasm, we get al-Ajilla, the greats. So a little dot shows, it's not just a little dot when you look close and you go back, but you see it makes sense that the rereading by the copyist of the word in this way fits with the more contextual understanding of the chapter. This is nothing much more than what I've already shown you. I will skip the details at this point. And we have in front of us a work with multiple readings, and with the vast vocabulary of Arabic and the certain openness of the text, it really was a play field for contributing copyists. And we can, through a very careful and a bottom-up reading, read the footsteps of individuals whose names we don't know. And that is the beauty that modern technology gives us. And if we add up the little mosaic stones of individual interventions, then we can also see that the rewriting was a systematic one. It was not general carelessness or just wild creativity. It was a comprehensive rethinking of where a particular copyist wanted to take a particular chapter. I think I told you all of that. And this is to show you that in the case of the redactor's attitude, we may have an anthology and a sort of book of practical intelligence and ethical behavior, but it is not an anthology, and that is the point number 8. Anthologies tend to freeze things. This is a living anthology because it moves with the time, and each copyist can constantly adapt it to the ethical and practical necessities that the reader of this book may have to face. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Gruendler. It's a fascinating project, of course. Professor Gruendler and her team, they have 10 years to finish the project. I failed to say that the project actually won an ERC grant and the Leibniz Prize, and you're having a lot of fun in Berlin, I'm sure. And imagine what happens, this is only from the manuscripts. Imagine what happens if you add the quotations that survive from various anthologies and then add the different languages to the text.
Don't remind me.
Yeah. And I thank you also for relating this to the topic of the conference, anthologies, because the text is not unique in that regard. This project is lucky to have an ERC grant, but think of the other projects like Maqamat, for example, as anthologies, but also Bilawhara and Budasif, Barlam and Josephat, which is similar text and a similar history.
Absolutely.
And as equal perhaps in terms of languages and translations and travel history. Think of Majnoon Layla, for example. Also the story as an anthology that also travels into so many languages.
Absolutely.
So thank you again, and I think we have time for 2 or 3 questions only. Dr. Bahmardi.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gruendler, for this fascinating presentation. I have just a few technical questions. The oldest manuscript is the Istanbul manuscript, which exists in the world now. The colophon, does the colophon mention where it was transcribed?
No.
So there is no indication where the script doesn't have any indication. For example, is it an Eastern, Iraqi, Egyptian, Syrian? No indication. I mean, maybe experts in old scripts can maybe find, because it would be interesting, since this manuscript, 618, you know, the Persian, the first Persian translation by Munshi, he used in that case a manuscript which is older than the existing manuscript. Now, and this manuscript was in Persia and Khurasan. In that case, through the Persian translation of Munshi, one can in fact make a kind of assumption what was the, because in fact his translation is very accurate regardless of the additions of Arabic verses and these things. But in fact that translation can help us in making like a very vague picture of a certain manuscript which existed before this oldest existing one. So this might be something which would help in just investigating what was even before these existing manuscripts. What about the manuscript which exists at the Orient Library in San Joseph? Is it, in fact, I heard that it is one of the oldest in the world. And also I heard that there is the Syriac, an old Syriac translation at the Ruh al-Qudus, the Holy Spirit University in Kaslik. So these were just because, you know, I'm very much interested in this topic. If you can provide us with some information on these points.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The Persian translation is based on a very early manuscript, and he says he used different ones. And that's the next thing we look at. And here, advertising, we will have a postdoc position for a Persian literature, and that will be, and since it is sort of Arabizing Persian, it will be very, very helpful in looking at the 11th century layer of the text. Absolutely. And for the Deir-e-Shir, apparently there was the Deir-e-Shir manuscript, which is the one from Pershehu, that is very old, but it's 100 years younger than the Hagia Sophia, but it's very bad. It's missing a couple of, it's missing the beginning, and it's lousy Arabic. But also the edition of Shehu, he was very faithful, so he reproduced it as is. So his edition is actually quite useful, even if you don't have the manuscript. So far, I have not been able to track that. It was moved from Deir-e-Shir. We were hunting it last time. One day I will find it. They have some interesting manuscript at University Saint Joseph, that is true. As to the Syriac manuscript, if you know anything about its whereabouts, I'd be very happy, because the excellent edition that was made by Schultes in 1912 or so was based on 4 different modern copies of a lousy text, and they themselves are lousy copy. And Schultes did a puzzle play So the edition we have is, you know, it's the best we can do, but if that manuscript shows up again, it was known in Paris in some Mardin collection until beginning of the last century, and then it disappeared and nobody knows where it is. If you find it, you're like, I would be so impressed.
Thank you so much for a wonderful lecture. It brought me back to Breasted Hall, actually, where we, I don't know if I ever told you that we, in a course on the editing of Arabic manuscripts, Professor Qadi selected the manuscripts of Kalīla wa-Dimna that were, I guess, Sprenglings.
Really?
I didn't have the words to ask this question then, and we were, of course, baffled. We ourselves drew some very rudimentary sorts of charts, but it's wonderful to see this project coming to life. And I don't think I had the words then, actually, for the question I'll ask you now. I wonder what this tells us more broadly about the ethics, maybe, and that is a strange word, the ethics of copyists, and why this text has this degree. I mean, Bilal and I, in our Yale manuscript of the Maqamat, you know, we saw a copyist basically copy pages beautifully, but completely out of order. You know, with no. I mean, he clearly did not. He was very, very careful. But you know, and so the ethics are astonishing in that area, right? And I wonder, you know, is this? Two, is it, you know, the nature of the text? I mean, we can, of course, postulate many different questions. I wonder, did this, in fact, continue into other language traditions? I mean, it does raise some questions about precisely not just Middle Arabic, but in fact, even the deeper questions of the ethics of copying. And I'm just very curious about that as a larger question.
Lovely questions. Thank you, Maurice. None of them can be answered quickly. But I'll tell you some sort of quick reactions about them. The ethics of copying, yeah, why was this text treated this way when a lot of other, Ibn Sina was copied very carefully? This text was not copied very faithfully, and you wonder why. And it may have to do with the genre. It was not balagha. It may have to do with the level of education of the copyists. So I think those two things need to be looked together. It is unusual. We don't expect this kind of a mess as we are taught. But if the more you look more broadly into the literature, that's sort of one step outside the philologist's control. Be that popular philosophy, Ikhwan al-Safa, be that geography, Qazwini, be that talismanic literature, astrology. So I think the moment you step outside the school, the Fusha, Balagha, you will find the situation more often it's just that nobody's sort of faced it, because it's a mess. And this is a particularly bad mess. But the solutions we come up with might help to be a bit more open to changeability of text in Arabic. And of course, the people in medieval studies are much smarter, and they've thought about that for 100 years. And a lot of the inspirations or the instrumentary I need at the moment, for instance, the change of models that one copyist had different models to copy from. The fluctuation is the result of copyists, you know, picking and choosing, you know, moving from this manuscript. In the middle of a chapter, the copy's this version, and then suddenly it looks like this version. And then per segment, pretty much like Ibn Manzur's, that's why Professor Behmadi asked you about that. There is one manuscript that has 5 others on the table, and to each segment puts all the aspects from all other manuscripts in that story. So that's proof. So the creativity of copyists has been underestimated so far.
We have a question from Carl.
We've talked about this, you and I, a little bit before, but I would want to ask you for an educated guess. to what extent would you think the many variations and juxtapositions of different stories and different pieces and the moving abouts of parts within stories and within lines and so on, could you make an educated guess as to what extent that has to do less with the copyist and perhaps more with the use of the document itself? In other words, would you imagine, can we imagine a kind of an oral performative substratum that the copyists are trying to make sense out of, perhaps?
You're quite right. When I say copyist, I don't mean the copyist, separate from the society and the social historical context. Obviously, anybody who copies does that for money. And there were some autographs. Some people copied it for themselves, but if it was copied for sale, which certainly the nicely illustrated ones were, they were thinking about the market or the readers. Absolutely. And the reason it traveled. So they were also thinking about the people who read the book, and they were gearing that towards people like themselves or perhaps fancy clients. One phenomenon that puzzles me still is there are many copies with gaps for pictures that have legends, what is on the picture, but the picture is not filled in. And one guess might be that it was just left open because it could be sold cheaper without the pictures. If the patron wanted to pay more, it could be filled in. And maybe more often the client was cheap and got that version. It's just a guess. I've asked your medievalists whether that often happens in medieval European manuscripts, but apparently not. But there are a number of manuscripts that look like that, so it could have been like on spec calculation. Certainly, so the audience is there, but I think it broadens to a more sub-elite readership.
Thank you so much. I'd like to add something actually that in Berlin, Professor Gruendler is not only interested in Kalīla wa-Dimna, but in all related texts to the project, including she's giving postdocs and PhD positions to all related texts to Kalīla wa-Dimna. So Berlin is becoming quickly the center to study such things.
Right. The follow-up project, the Leibniz project, which will start in 3 years, will continue the Kalīla, but it's called Al-Arab al-Arabi Muwatin al-Alam. And it will deal with Balaam and Josaphat and the Seven Sages. There is a Norwegian project dealing with that as well. And so all the cosmopolitan works with an Arabic phase. So there are many more that I'm looking at. So anybody's interested, please get in touch.
And we'll take 10 minutes break, and then we'll be back for the conclusion and discussion, of course. Thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to start by saying that I think that we can all agree that we have achieved several purposes, and perhaps one of the main purposes was to push to the sides something which has tactfully been called old wisdom. And that is one thing that perhaps we could look at. We've established critical mass in this subject that might be worth evaluating, summing up. And we've done a very concrete thing. We've looked at an awful lot of components and structures. And I think that that is probably the first time that it has been done on this scale and over this range. So those are just 3 lines of thought that occur to me for development discussion. But of course, there will be others that you might want to suggest. To kick off with.
And we have 30 minutes.
Right.
Thank you very much. well, I also think that it was just a very enriching and just a great event. Again, thanks very much, Bilal, and everyone who was engaged in the organization. I'm wondering whether it would make sense to include in the discussion, the perspectives of publication and how is it going to be structured, what is the schedule, but maybe also sort of how do we envision this to be continued in form of the publication? Shall it be most sort of structured towards the methodology of approaching, or more of a historical survey? Would it make sense to share these views from the participants? Yeah, thank you.
So I had a difficulty actually because I received a lot of submissions and not everyone was included. So the conference in itself is an anthology. And it was also sometimes hard to, for example, just one example, Ghassan al-Masri's paper he couldn't come, it's about the use of al-Mufaddaliyat and al-Asma'iyat as anthologies to understand the Quran. So where do I put this? Is it under religion and education, or is it under poetry, for example? And I've decided at the end to put it under religion because I already had 4 papers on poetry. So sometimes it's arbitrary, the division. So we'll have to look at the final papers, and because some of you might change the topic a little bit, based on the discussion or on other research, and we'll have to come up with new themes. But I very much enjoyed, for example, the panel on emotions or the panel on pleasure, and these perhaps can be also in one category. So I'm also using these papers to tackle questions that I hear in the field as well. So now we have a forthcoming conference on emotions, for example. I'm interested in the topic. So we'll see the final product. But we definitely want to have a publication. Brill is very much interested. There is, of course, the American University of Beirut Press, which I actually chair. So I know we can have it there. So it's one of these 2 publishers. It's not going to be an expensive book because we would like to subsidize it. So it's not going to be a $200, $300 book, hopefully. So yeah, this is more or less. And we're open to suggestions. If you suggest anything, maybe perhaps I'm the editor of Abhath, the co-editor of Abhath, together with Ramzi Baalbaki. This can be a special issue of Abhath, for example. But we're hoping to receive the final papers in 6 months, and then we'll decide then to what to do. So you have 6 months. We will, of course, have a copy editor as well.
How far do you want it to be addressed across disciplines among Arabists, and how far do you think it would be possible to make it a complete thing? Would it be desirable for it to be a comparative literature thing, or one that people in comparative literature could be invited to think of buying and reading?
That's another project of mine that I will announce very soon. I just joined the team of scholars working on anthologies in different traditions, and it's going to be anthology as world literature. So it's going to be a 4-volume. They're hosting a conference. I'm one of the 4 organizers. So this will be another project. So I would like to keep this within Arabic literature. But of course, there will be a conference on that as well.
Oh, I forgot. Sorry. Bit brain dead. While thinking about what Kalīla wa-Dimna, I thought about what makes an anthology, so we should have some classifying categories. And maybe even the papers could be sorted that way. And there are several aspects under which you could look at the anthologies. One would be, what is the thematic coverage of a given one? And that touches on the subject, where you put it, is the mufaddaliyat, is it poetry, or does it have a bearing on the language of the Quran? Another one would be structural, how are they organized? By formal features, by, for instance, Professor Balbaki is not here, but in those Gharib al-Hadith, for instance, you have thematic categories, but you have also word patterns, for instance. Or, so structural would be another way of approaching anthologies. A third one would be what their function and message is, that also what audience they talk to, what do they want to achieve, is it a specialist or general knowledge, is it theory, is it practice, whatever. And the fourth one would be the literary historical use, and that's what you mentioned in your preface. The length of literature makes it necessary to sort the past constantly and reorganize it in some way. So those 4 points, theme, structure, function, and literary historical, might be categories under which one could sort the papers, and also in the introduction, make sense of what defines an Arabic anthology.
Yeah, maybe we should be, well, I don't want to be too provocative, but maybe we should think about, if we do it like we do, the impression can be that everything is an anthology in Arabic literature, so we have to delimitate it maybe from something like compilations and other kinds of works that have this kind of encyclopedias, or that are quoting other people, even like historical works like Tabari and so on. So, because when even Fada'il and Tafsir and everything, in a way we are speaking about literature as a whole. So we have to be, if a category should be useful, you have to delimit a field, and so we have to think a little bit about what is an anthology and what not, especially what is not an anthology, because that's this kind of way of approaching material is very frequent, or I think it's nearly the rule in pre-modern texts. So that would be something that we should, maybe we don't have to define, but at least in the introduction, like make clear that we are doing something that is a field of its own, and that it makes sense to put all these examples together. And I don't know, at the end, when you have all the contributions, you can even then summarize and see where the main threads go and where the problems are, for example. So I think that would be useful also for someone not doing Arabic studies, like Julia said.
Absolutely, right, because everything can be an anthology somehow, but even speech is an anthology, right? It's an array of words that you're selecting and you're arranging. The issue is here that we're dealing with literary anthologies, mostly. So none of you talked about tafsir, for example, as an anthology. It was mentioned, but hadith or philosophy or etc. So we're talking about literary anthology. And I think the conference, the title of the conference, approaches to pre-modern Arabic anthologies. And I would like to keep the interdisciplinary aspect of it, because the way it was perceived from the beginning as a dialogue between me and Nadia, a historian and someone who does literature. So as a tribute to Nadia, I would like to also keep this. She's also going to be the co-editor, by the way. So she will definitely be interested in history. But I think these different approaches, right? Because to approach an anthology as Adam said, as a piece of art in itself, the organization, the structure, the agenda, etc. But okay, anthology as useful for other fields or something like this. So it would be, different angles of approaching an anthology. But I think we're more or less in agreement that it's about literary anthologies.
Can I say something also? I fully agree with you, because I mean it is within the human nature that when one focuses on something, a certain aspect, then gradually he starts seeing everything within the scope of that aspect. So, for 3 days, we have been, in fact, talking about anthologies, and then, I'm telling you about myself. I started seeing everything through the then I start thinking all the diwans are anthologies. So gradually, in fact, we have nothing other than anthology in even in tafsir and hadith. So everything, I think, in order to have some kind of borderlines, we need to make a very clear definition of anthology. Since, we are dealing with literary texts in pre-modern time, let's see how these pre-modern authors like Ibn Abd Rabbihi and the others, they defined what is the anthology. And let's take their definition and find out whatever applies to that definition of the pre-modern Arabic literary anthologists would be, in fact, within. But, in fact, I'm leaving the conference by thinking that everything from tomorrow I will be teaching my students for the rest of my life anthologies. There is nothing other than that. But this is,
Yeah, I totally agree, but of course, if you start with this point with literary anthologies, you start to think about how to define literary. And that's not that easy, because you have, for example, in the Iqbal Farid, I have the case that, of course, he's a poet, and he has chapters where it is about poetry, and poetry is clearly literature, but he has sections, for example, on Sultan, where he quotes speeches, but he quotes even stories about, from Kalīla wa-Dimna, and even like wisdom about how really to rule a state. So it is practical as well. And there is something in between where I have the impression that it depends on how you frame a khabar, or how you frame a story. If you use it as literature because it's beautiful, or if you use it because it is useful. And for example, in the Iqbal Farid, that's what I tried to say, and it was used for a while as encyclopedia, as a book about everything that is useful, and later on it was used in school just for reading, or because it's nice, or because it's beautiful, or whatever. So I think that might be difficult. At least you have to make clear what you're speaking about, yeah. But I get your point, but when you go to the borders, it's always difficult.
The issue is that because we've been discussing anthologies, yes, we started to look at everything as an anthology. Sometimes it's a useful angle, or a glass to look through. But any topic can be like this, right? I'm currently working on emotions a little bit, and I was writing on Hija al-Mudun, right? And I was thinking about it as an anthology for a paper for this conference, and then I decided, you know what? That's a good topic for that emotion. So also emotions, you can look at all genres from the angle of emotions, for example. So there is this anthologizing aspect we're interested in, and can be applied to any work.
Just very briefly, maybe. I understand the need of, clear definitions, but I'm a bit skeptical if you start to think normatively about it. We don't have a word for anthology in Arabic proper, but the same applies to the word of adab in English, right? So it's sort of one-to-one. And thinking about the volume, we have this impressive diversity of text stretching, over various periods, and geographically and literary as well. And why don't we just, make the volume in the sense that, yes, we do include the text, we all have our text, which we understand as anthologists, and then present to the audience outside, actually, in the foreground, the way we approach them, the way we think, they should be read, or the questions, just along the lines which Beatrice mentioned, the questions like what is the role of authorship and so on, so more of a general questions from the perspective of literary studies. And that would make the volume, I think, valuable in our own field, but also interesting for someone to read who is not in the field of Arabic studies.
So your solution is just a twist. It's to make it argumentative, that the idea anthologies is a concept that we can argue about through our different approaches, rather than having to try and cover every possible
yeah, exactly. Or
variety.
even to come up with a definition which is then basically killing the fun, right?
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to add. Yeah, it's more about putting these questions at the beginning. So making clear that we have thought about, and that these are the other problems. For example, what you said, to see anthologies as an approach or as an angle to look at, it's okay, but you have to make it clear, not just descriptive, so just here one, and you don't know what it is about. So because some readers will like to look at the introduction and say, what's the point about anthologies? And then you make clear what the problems are, and that's okay. I think that's not a problem. That's very common.
I was just going to throw out an idea about the process of definition, but I think your point is well taken, that we might be able to just finesse, as it were, the whole question by putting it forward as the question we are wrestling with, and here are some of the answers or some of the ways that we have approached the question. The only thought that I had about that was just, it seems to me, if you're going to define something as an anthology, you have to talk either about the intention of the author or the use of the document at the end of the day. But that's, you know, that may be a question really to raise rather than to try to answer.
Should we be thinking of engaging with the work that has already been published on organizing fields of knowledge and that kind of thing? That there are some threads there that we can pick up and use to frame this, perhaps, so that it's not out there all by itself, but part of other ongoing new ways of approaching our field.
Well, I can say this about the documents that I've been working on. No one that I know of has approached Collage Hall from any of the angles that we've been talking about here, which is really innovative in that sense, you know.
Well, I'm thinking of two or more things. Some time ago, there was a work that Dimitri Gutas took part in, which was about organizing knowledge. This went over several centuries. And as a sort of response to it recently, James Weaver, Letizia Osti and others organized a series of conferences which are being published progressively, which are called Putting the House of Wisdom in Order, which are precisely about the structure and purpose of works, so epistemology through structure and so on. So it's not unrelated to what we're doing here.
Yeah, I think the encyclopedia people are doing very similar things. So that's exactly it. Yeah, no.
If I can add something, we are interdisciplinary in some ways that we include music. And if a musical songbook is not an anthology, then what is? So in the sense of having different media, it will be interdisciplinary. But it makes sense to stay first within the Arabic because there's so much. And only geographically and chronologically big tradition like the Arabic has this variety. Then maybe there are similar things in Chinese or in Akkadian, I'm sure there is. But before we can even go there, we have to present something for the outside person. You know, what is the spread, the variety, but also the borders of an Arabic anthology. And then we can start going to our colleagues.
I face perhaps a similar challenge. Riddles are a worldwide genre. If I went into the Exeter manuscript and I don't think there is a tradition that, certainly in Akkadian, they have riddles. And I am a comparativist. I'm very sensitive to the demands of comparative literature, and that's always my impulse. I think I have enough of a stretch trying to turn Abiyat al-Ma'ani into an anthology, because as I've listened to all the talks, I've changed my mind about them completely. I'm not sure that it's knowledge being organized so much as manufactured. I'm thrilled to be a part of it, but it's going to be a great stretch, and I'm not sure. A paragraph, I can do a paragraph, certainly. But if it's an overarching ethos, it's going to escape my grasp entirely. That's just all about me there. Anyone else?
I don't know, I mean, besides just transmitting knowledge, I mean, this idea of making the world readable, I mean, the idea of somebody said the philosophy of education. I mean, maybe it's not very inspiring as a term, but the edifying part of an anthropology, an anthology, this idea of representing a certain field of knowledge, not only to represent it, but also to make it accessible to others. I don't know, in this edifying part of an anthology. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but not just organizing, but transmitting knowledge and making it accessible to others. So.
I loved, by the way, Beatrice, your distinction between ilm and adab, where ilm goes deep and adab goes broad. I almost might suggest that as a catchword or a key phrase or something for what we're talking about. I don't know. It had never occurred to me to distinguish them in that way before, and I'm grateful.
Well, that's not me. It's just when you look at early definitions of adab, the people, the udaba who write about it, they explain adab as what ilm is not. That you take a little bit of everything and you don't waste time with becoming a specialist, which gives you the time to apply the knowledge. And the udaba usually are people who stand in real life. Often they're kutab in the 9th century. So they don't have time to, read big books.
But that's two-sided, isn't it? Because the people who provide this knowledge are themselves deeply as well as widely knowledgeable. And in some cases they say, I have a readership of not very bright people who need to have some ideas knocked into their skulls. And in other cases they engage in a much more challenging way with their readers. So that's a bit of a sort of trick definition or self-definition or a polemical definition, which maybe goes to the essence of the anthology, because they are not all easy reads. I just wondered if any of you have had your consciousness shaped by anthologies in the same way as many English readers of English have, by things like the Golden Treasury and the English Parnassus. Is anybody here, as it were, the product of that kind of reading?
When I hear anthologies, the last time there was this huge debate, it was at Yale about world literature. And then we looked at all sorts of anthologies. This is the modern anthology making. And then the first argument was the great old white men thing. I don't like anthologies of Western literature because there's usually one token woman and forget the rest. It's usually Jane Austen. And so this is where anthologizing for European literatures was rethought. And then we had all these college books with Mahabharata, Pillow Book, God knows what else, Bookmans, and Martin Puchner at Harvard is not doing the same thing over. So this is where anthologies, make you look at them rather more critically. But I suppose the practice of making anthologies precisely for college teaching is a very up-to-date problem. So the debate should engage with that.
And maybe also Adam's idea of what is left out by the anthology. I mean, when I was this idea of what is left out, I think for it to make sense, and for example, if you're writing women's history, we understand that there's a silence that we need to read. You read against the text. You try to give voice to something that doesn't exist, but you know that you're looking for the voice of a woman. I mean, so you know what it is you're looking for that is not there. So I was asking him when he said about all these things that are left out by the anthologies, I mean, if you want to think about them, then we need to have some idea of what is it that is not being mentioned before we can sort of look into that silence, right? But it's an interesting thing to also consider.
Oh, what just occurred to me. Professor Behmadi suggested we find out what the authors like Ibn Abdirabih say about their own anthologies. Of course, listen to those people first. So make a little collection of that. But the other one would be, I don't know whether, you know, Bilal, you can say no, but it would be nice to have a list of all anthologies that are available in print and Arabic and then sort them thematically. And that would be very useful. And then the quantitative, it'll show, oh, okay, the most anthologies we have are on flowers, or not. But we don't know.
In the 18th century, they become much more diverse in terms of genres when they start printing them. Actually, it's I just noticed that it's sort of, you see the expansion of the variety.
The problem, I worked on something like this, and you used it on when I talked on Safar, right? Because sometimes there is an anthology just on travel, that Safar al-Muluk. The exact same material can appear in a chapter in another anthology, Nihayat al-Arab, for example, right? Mm-hmm. So thematically it doesn't work because they're multi-thematic anthologies and they're monothematic anthologies.
Well, but that's a special category then.
That's a special category, but so maybe a database, yes, of all the works, but also of the names of the chapters within the work would also make sense. And yeah, help us get an ERC grant. that would be very useful.
Yeah, but then become, then you have to.
Yeah, we have to define that first.
Yeah.
I mean, on the lines of what you've suggested, I have a file on my computer which is like 100 pages long, just poetry collections, printed editions.
Oh God.
So I mean, I'm not sure exactly how we could achieve something like that in like a conference volume.
Okay. Nice idea.
That's why when I was
well, we need it. I mean, we definitely need it, but I mean.
That's why when I was writing anthologies, I thought of categories of anthologies, and the most important works within that category. And I thought the reader can always add works when you have a skeleton, and then the reader, it's a map somehow to navigate the anthology literature, not necessarily an enumeration of all the works.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have 3 minutes left. You have to say the closing words.
It was a pleasure to have you here in Beirut. I personally learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to having you again and every year. So expect every year a conference on Adab here in Beirut, in addition to other workshops and conferences. And if you know of anyone who'd like to be included in the volume, please let me know. And I thank again AUB with all its resources, the support of the Dean, of course, the Center for Arts and the Humanities, the Department of Arabic and Near Eastern Languages, my colleagues and my graduate students, and you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.